Hey y'all, hope you're doing well today. So today I have a really interesting presentation. I hope you find it interesting. It's the material I came across was really interesting to me, so I'm excited to share it with you all. And throughout the years, I always try to be on the lookout for unique books. And sometimes I don't have any intention of really reading them right away. I just, if something catches my attention, I feel like it's for a reason. And so today's message is inspired from a book like that I picked up years ago. In college, I only took one class on theater, on acting, and I don't remember anything from it. And it really wasn't that impactful, but it did sort of pique my interest. And so I don't go to watch plays or anything on the regular, but the concept of acting has become very interesting to me in recent years, specifically after learning how people do this in our reality to try and fake us off and manipulate us and use and abuse us, right? And they're essentially acting. That's what they're doing. They're actors, and which I've always found it interesting in relation to that, to the term actors or acting, that people who are operating in our world with bad intentions, like even in the news, they refer to these people as bad actors. Have you noticed? I just find that really interesting. So yes, bad actors. So anyway, the book that I picked up years ago is this one. And it's something that when it just kind of caught my attention, I didn't really understand why. It wasn't during the same time when I had that one class in college. I just had to fulfill like this requirement, right? So it was, I think, the only available class at the time that met the requirement. And so no relation to that, but it caught my attention. And anytime a book catches my attention, I pick it up in the store and I'll flip through it. And this is one where I haven't ever actually read the book, but I have flipped through it. And even that first moment when I found this book and I flipped through it, it's got a lot of information on psychology. And so today what I'm going to do is summarize bits and pieces of it for the conversation in relation to how bad actors, narcissists, or toxic and manipulative people with bad intentions, how they fake us off, how they manipulate us. There's some techniques that we're going to discuss specifically. So I hope that you find the message today very interesting. I hope that it's beneficial for you, and ultimately that it gets the wheels turning for you. So it mentions a state of fluency. There's a part in the book where he's talking about writing, and it was really interesting because this was in the beginning of the book. He's kind of pointing out just little short sections, topics where there were moments in his life, in the author's life, that made a big impact on him and his perception of the world, of reality. And he just allows a small portion of his book to highlight these impactful experiences. And one of them, I don't remember what he titled it, but he's essentially talking about how he used to enjoy writing and how it actually worked against him when he was in school, and how they wanted him to write. So it sounds like a good thing at first, right? He wanted to write. They wanted him to write. And so I think the way he put it was his interests coincided with those of the school, right? But it turned out to be a bad thing. And it's like, why? This is where I was reminded of another book that I picked up, same kind of circumstance. It was just kind of different and had some really unique points. And I mentioned it before in a past video sometime, but it's called Becoming a Writer by Dorothea Brand, with an E on the end, Brand. And it also is related to psychology. So this book today is related to psychology for the purpose of helping people going into an acting career. And then the other book I'm talking about, Becoming a Writer, is using psychology for the purpose of helping people to become a writer, right? To develop that skill. And so, you know, I feel like anytime we attempt to become a mastery in any subject or anything that interests us in this life, we have to first master our mind, right? And that's just good for all of us to have a good understanding of ourselves and how our minds work. And specifically after you exit a toxic situation, to learn how the mind works so that you can't be manipulated again, right? It's to help you understand and make sense of these age-old directives, like even in the Bible, where it talks about how we really do need to put on the full armor of God. It's like, that sounds good, and I'm not going to discount anyone's interpretation of that, because I believe it's a personal matter. I really do. And so in that regard, it's unique to each one of us. But like for me, when I would read verses like that, it's like, that sounds good, but what does it mean? You know what I mean? Like, how do you really do that? So I feel like as we're striving to learn and grow, at least for me, I'm learning what that means. Like actual actions that I can embrace and implement as part of a healthy and good and safe lifestyle that serves to protect me, you know. So I just want to share that with you. So going back to what I was saying, that he was talking about writing. He loved to write, and the school wanted him to write. Well, the bad part of that, the bad piece of that, is that he's writing, and then they're coming in and getting him to rewrite and edit and correct, right? Which is the same thing that was discussed in that book I shared with you, Becoming a Writer. It stunts your creativity. Essentially, it's like you have this fluency, right? This natural creative state, which we talked about recently in a prior video. And I feel like that's or at least a big part of our natural state, our intended state of being, is to be in this state of flow, where we don't have to be guarded. But here's the thing, we're also instructed to live guarded. So you have to have situational awareness as to when you should be guarded and when it's safe to let your guard down. And that's going to be a big theme of today's discussion, okay? So I found it interesting. So going back to the writing, you know, it's almost like being constantly corrected stunted his creativity, and he got to a point where he just couldn't write at all, because there was this underlying fear of it's not going to be good enough, or it's going to be wrong, or you're going to have to redo it. So it's like that critical voice was born, and it's almost like he couldn't get started again. It's the same way with a controlling person who's constantly correcting you. Every little bitty thing you do, no matter how big or small, they're just interjecting their opinion, how you could do it better, or how they would do it, or how you should have done it. And it does, I feel like, stunt us, that creative flow, really, in regards to our life force energy. And that's why I feel like when I talk about being frozen a lot, I think it throws us into this state of dissociation, which we're going to talk about, being frozen, being stuck. A lot of times people describe being in the middle of narcissistic abuse as being stuck, or stuck in the mud, not being able to move forward because it feels like you're in a fog. All of these different lenses to communicate the same thing. So what we're going to be talking about today is actually how hypnosis works, and how surrendering our mind to another person works through hypnosis and techniques there, and how that relates to psychological abuse, narcissistic abuse, because a lot of times this is described as being under a spell, how these people, these liars and manipulators, cast a spell on us. And it's true. And so we're just moving into the logical here and really getting a good understanding of what that means with specifics. So, yoga has been really interesting for me. And one of the biggest ahas I've had, like a light bulb moment, has been understanding how much the mind truly does impact the body. And let me just explain. When you are trying to push yourself, right, to push your limits, right, extend your limits as you're improving, quote unquote, right, with yoga. It's like, for example, in poses that are there's a lot of flexibility required, where ultimately success equates to or translates to being flexible and being able to stretch very far in a particular pose. It's been really interesting to me to experience firsthand how you reach a limit when you're stretching your body in a particular pose, and you're convinced, that's it, I can feel my muscles are totally tight, that's it, this is as far as I can go. But that's where the breathing technique comes in, where you put your mind at ease, which lets you, or encourages you, to let down your guard mentally. And when you do that and you move into a state of relaxation, which is really like submission or surrender, then it gives you this feeling of safety and comfort, and you just automatically, suddenly, those muscles where you thought that was your limit, they just let go, and you can just go all the way into the pose. I'm not suggesting you do this. In fact, I suggest that you're very careful doing this kind of thing if you do attempt it, because I had to learn there are other things that can be impacted, like your nerves, that can be overstretched. And so there can be consequences. See, it seems like a good thing once you realize this, how to push past perceived limits. But there, like I said, there can be consequences, so you have to be careful. But it was just so incredible to experience and to understand how much the mind is in control of the body. So, manipulators truly understand this kind of thing. I'll give them that. And as we continue to learn and grow, we're going to I feel like, understand how better to construct that armor so that we can't be encouraged, right? It's so subtle, this manipulation. We can't be encouraged to surrender our minds to these people. There's all kind of Bible verses about that. Guarding your heart, taking every thought captive to the Word of God, the truth. And so we're supposed to be on guard on our post, right? Maintaining our own lane and being vigilant. We're directed to do all those things, even though it feels nice to just kind of relax, all right? That feels nice. That's where you have to be careful with your feelings. So yes. Fluency, going back to the concept of writing, or even with just living your day-to-day life, the state of flow, fluency, is only possible without the fear of being reprimanded. It requires safety, right? There's an element of safety, and manipulative people give us a false sense of safety and security oftentimes. You just have to know how to identify that, how they're doing that. So this was incredible in this book. He's talking about blockages to an actor's potential, and he's discussing how our personalities serve as a form of security for us. He even went, and I'm not, I'm certainly don't, this is new to me. And there's a lot of concepts in here where I'm thinking this is really stretching my mind, and I'm not really sure that I agree with every point he makes, but I'm going to share some with you anyway, okay? And again, I always encourage you to draw your own conclusions. But he mentions sanity versus insanity, and how we all have thoughts that are might be labeled insane, or that are shocking. This is what he's saying, in that we all sort of censor ourselves to a degree, and that this constructs our personality, and that this kind of gets into the book Women Who Run with the Wolves a little bit. We're domesticated or civilized intentionally, so that we can feel like we are included within a community, within our society, so that we're not rejected. It comes down to like this primal survival instinct, to make sure that we are accepted into a group, right, for survival. It's like this primal instinct from forever. And so he's talking about how we can censor ourselves, essentially, because we don't want to be labeled crazy or whatnot, even though we all have wild thoughts from time to time. And so his point is that this inhibits great acting. That's like a barrier that a great actor, as they're learning and growing in their career, they need to be able to push beyond. And so that was really interesting. So that's kind of like the motivating factor for him to go into the discussion of some psychological concepts, and specifically hypnosis. And this was the part that I really read through, and it was really interesting to me. So he's talking about how hypnotists induce trance states, right? We know this, but they do it through certain techniques. And ultimately, they must convince you that they are in control of you, right? They convince you to fall in line. And so let's talk about some examples. There was one example he gave where there was a hypnotist that was directing a person to move their arms, like lift their arm and move their arms in certain directions. But the way he was describing it it started off sounding, just kind of simple and logical, but it just kind of went into directions that were conflicting, and they didn't make sense, and they were confusing. Okay, that's the point. They were confusing directives. Well, we all know that manipulators use confusion on purpose. We call it creating chaos, right? They do this on purpose. And what's interesting is he says that people, even though they didn't understand, they would grasp at straws and do their best to submit, especially when the directives were given in a loud and commanding voice, like this voice of authority. So a lot of times we come to the realization that manipulators, they act superior, obviously, right? I mean, even if it's covert, you can still sense this superiority, this spirit of superiority in them. But they use this too to make us feel inferior, and it may be a loud and commanding voice. It may be through condescension. It's just that whole power dynamic, right? And it's like they place a crown on their own head, just making themselves the authority without it really being real. You see what I'm saying? And so the danger is when we just accept it. We just accept that they're the authority and that they're superior. That's the danger. That's why you have to be on guard, because these techniques are so subtle. Remember, it's comforting on some level within our psyche to surrender. It's almost like, a child doesn't have to worry about crossing the street with their parent. They don't even have to look. If they've got a hold of their parent's hand, then they know that the parent is in charge. So it's comforting, right? They don't have to be on guard. And that's kind of the same kind of power dynamic that a controlling person is trying to create with us. All right. So again, they use a loud and commanding voice, and hypnotists found that people submit when given these confusing, even just conflicting directives through a loud and commanding voice. And then another technique, you've heard of the whole "your eyes are getting heavy," hypnotists saying that. That's a very commonly well-known technique. Well, I didn't know this, but a lot of times the hypnotist does this from a position of maybe the person that's being hypnotized is sitting down and the hypnotist is standing up. So they're telling you your eyes are getting heavy, but they also direct you to look up. Well, if you look up for an extended period, it is very tiring on your eyes. It creates fatigue in your eyes anyway, right? That's an important part. But you're also looking up at the hypnotist, right? So it's that whole power dynamic. Again, not even spoken. This is how covert narcissists work. They don't even have to speak the manipulation sometimes. It can just be through body language or looks or just things like this, where they're placing themselves in this higher position. And when you hear the hypnotist, this was a point he made, when you hear them say, your eyes are getting heavy, you're thinking they are. And so it's almost like the fact that this person is speaking what you feel like is truth, because you can verify, I am getting, my eyes are getting heavy. Then at that point, you're giving them credibility. So that's why a lot of times you hear people talk about manipulators or spellcasters using half-truths, because that's a hook for us. Because we're like, yeah, that's true, right? So anything to give them credibility, to justify that crown they've placed on their own head. You see what I'm saying? From your perspective, that's their goal. And then this was interesting. He talked about using cups and coins with someone that was being hypnotized, and how the person was directed to lift the cup that had the coin under it. Like maybe there were 3 or 5 cups, but there was, she was told only one had a coin under it. Well, she was right every time, but the trick was, and they use trickery. See, that's just it. It's all a web, a veil of lies. And that's the piece we don't know. So the trick was that every cup had a coin under it. So when she would lift, it didn't matter each time. I guess he would move them around. He didn't give all the details, but I guess every single time she was right. I don't know what the directives were, but his point was that this person was made to believe that he was in control of her mind through this exercise, that there was some kind of synchronicity happening here, where he was in control. So he said that this actually created a dissociated state. This is basically how the mind becomes surrendered to this external person who now becomes the authority over our mind. Okay? So I kept reading, and there was a big determining factor to the control techniques being successful. And that factor was that the subject had to believe. What did they have to believe? They had to believe that they were not in control. They had to be so persuaded and convinced that this other person was truly the authority, that it created a submission, right, of control. And they were made to believe they were inferior. The controller projected superiority through trickery. And, in real life, controlling people pressure us. They do this also through pressure, creating stress and duress. So you have to be able to pick up these things, you know what I mean, to detect them. But ultimately, there must be a willingness on our part to surrender. Okay, that's key. And remember, surrender on some level, maybe even unconsciously, can feel good because it can feel like safety. Okay, I want to read this quote to you with regards to that. He said, remember, this is all the purpose of discussing all this in this book, is to help actors to move past a psychological blockage so that they can fully embody a character that they're playing, right? It says, once you understand that you're no longer held responsible for your actions, then there's no need to maintain a personality. I thought that quote was just incredibly interesting, because we often describe narcissists as having no personality either. Which is why a lot of times, to bring in the spiritual lens, it almost seems like there's, a dark entity at play through a person sometimes. Just so many layers, so many things to think about, even with that one statement. I'm going to read it again. Once you understand that you're no longer held responsible for your actions, then there's no need to maintain a personality. Student improvisers asked to pretend to be hypnotized show a sudden improvement. So, again, techniques to become a better actor. But I feel like we can learn a lot from that as far as psychology, right? So, yes. So surrender can feel like safety. And that just goes back to the yoga stretching, sometimes the yoga instructors will say, you're safe. There's a floor underneath you that supports you. Just, put it in your mind that you're safe to relax into this pose, right? And that a lot of times that's all it takes. All right. So somebody told me this one time, and it really kind of stuck with me. She said, everything we do has a benefit to us. And so if you think about surrendering, I've mentioned it, there's a level of comfort that comes with that. Well, that's feelings. That's what that is. It's feelings, okay? The shift that happens here in this kind of dynamic where there's a controller trying to seize power and authority over our mind, right? If this happens, the shift is so subtle, I feel like we don't realize we may have just made a life-altering decision on feelings, because it's very similar to this dynamic we've been talking about, right? The surrender. There's an underlying equation within our unconsciousness that says, I can relax, I can let go, I can feel comfortable, I can let my guard down. So we have to be very careful that we're not allowing this subtle shift, even on a different level that's not in our full conscious awareness within our psyche, to take place. And then really what truly happened was we've made a life-changing decision because it feels good. You see what I'm saying? So I want to read Ephesians next, chapter 6, verses 10 through 18. It says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. So, I found it interesting that within those verses, it was mentioned again and again to stand firm, and to stand. So I looked up the etymology of stand, and this was interesting. All right, so go ahead and take a moment in your mind to understand, or to identify what the term stand means to you. Okay, and then once you've got that, let's move forward. The Old English standin', A-N, stand, A-N, means to occupy a place. Occupy a place. Yes. So, occupy our body, occupy our mind, our heart. That's what it means to guard our heart, right? And to take every thought captive. It means to not hand over the authority to a controlling person, to now become the authority of our mind. Okay, for them to occupy our mind space. That's our job. So important. We can't not occupy this space. We're directed again and again to stand, to occupy a place. So, to put it in my words, I would say don't abandon your post. Don't abandon your post, right? And then furthermore, this is in the online etymology dictionary, by the way. It continues, it says, to continue, to exist, take place, oppose, resist attack, be on one's own feet, consist. And then in the 1300s, it's related to, in the sense of to exist or be present, meaning encounter without flinching. Yes, so it's strength in that regard, standing firm in your space, right? So I would just encourage you today and always to be immovable, no matter the plethora of techniques from the enemy. Okay, it's crucial that we don't make the mistake of handing over this authority. We have to be able to identify the subtle techniques, the sleight of hands, and so being on guard is crucial, right? And as long as we do this, then they don't stand a chance. So I hope that you're encouraged today. I hope that I've gotten the wheels turning for you. I hope it's been interesting. I thank you for joining me today with this message, and I hope that you have a beautiful day. And I'll see you again very soon.